Hello, this is Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and we're in the road to MSI, where I go through every playoff series of every region, every single game, yes, including that one. And some of you who may be watching the series go, wait, didn't you just finish doing all of them? Yes. And as the title might suggest, and you probably already read this, we're going to go through every team one by one. Today, we're going to meet, with no further instructions, the 3-time world champions, 1-time MSI, 2-time MSI. We're holders of titles. We are going to be meeting T1, the first team to qualify for MSI. So, without further ado, let's go. So let's meet the coaching staff. T1's team over here contains head coach Pult and assistant coach Moment. Pult, notably, having been with T1 since 2020, this is his only coaching career so far, and has been with the team for about a year and a half at this point. Well as Moment, some people may recognize being part of Generic Green Wings in the coaching team, as well as then transferring straight to T1, bouncing between their main roster and their challengers team for the coaching staff. A couple of notable things with them, or at least in terms of their ban perspective and the way that they set up their teams. When you notice that a lot of the bans against them have to do with 1-3-1 and sieging setups, the team here specifically really enjoys sieging and pressuring lanes and pushing the momentum very, very early. So, what does this account for? Well, T1 really likes to avoid contesting 1-3-1 zone and siege compositions, or like teamfight compositions of any kind of sort. So that's why you notice many of the Renekton, Rise, and Akali bans across their particular spring split. So what does this translate into? Well, it translates into aggressive, fast, and bloody games. So throwing a whole bunch of stats across the window here, their kills per game, 16.1 kills per game. This is a non-stop go, 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 go. They have a high win rate with this particular strategy also. They hold a whole lot of heralds, first turret at the game most of the time, and the average tower difference that they hold is always so high. They generate an amount of gold so obscene during the laning phase, it is mind-bogglingly impressive. Note, one of the games I've literally witnessed just from laning phase, no kills, developing 1.5k lead at 6 minutes, something crazy to hold with, and they will balloon it till the stratosphere. One thing, however, is that they were very low on dragon taking. Very high amount of heralds, very high amount of barons, and notably, the amount of barons per game they take is usually just the one, as they try to finish frequently before 25 minutes. They're very aware of their approach to the game and how to make sure to benefit the most at any given situation. And honestly, very hard to punish unless they get over aggressive. If you notice here, they also have a high deaths per game. Oftentimes, T1 will find themselves skill checking more than anything else. They are not lossless. They haven't lost a single series, but they've lost 8 games across the split still. And many of this is from not silly, but brash movement and mistakes created across the board. But given this particular high tempo strategy, the number of first bloods they get, and how much they control the map at the earliest instances of the game, developing so much gold from tower and laning, it is very hard to catch these punishments when it happens, as they keep killing you and over and over. So that's what the overall look with the team play and the coaching staff. So what do the individual players look like? Starting in the top lane, we've got Zeus. Not Zeus, as far as I remember how that's pronounced. He, being with T1 since December of 2019 on the Academy, has jumped back and forth since the 2020 till presently as the substitute in the main roster, but has been in the main roster since December of 2021 and has done incredibly well for himself. Holding in a very high, as most of the laners across the board in T1, very high pressure and CS difference, gold difference, XP difference, the whole shebangle. The difference is that he's very isolated. T1 trusts to give him champions that frequently require early leads and for him to develop it on his own. And honestly, kudos. I would not trust any other team to do so. You can tell here, however, that his most played champion, despite having a ludicrous 12 champions played, most players across the board in MSI have a ludicrous amount of champions played, but having 12 champions played, his most is definitely Jace, favoring again the type of sieging compositions that T1 is very favored on. And given the high win rate that he has across the board with different 1-3-1, flanking, and sieging champions, it is no surprise that this is who they landed on for this year. With it, a couple of things that are also just to be noted on things. Because of his low kill participation, however, it makes it very easy for situations of a bunch of teams playing off of hyper-aggression 4v5 for the rest of the team. Whether or not this gets punished at MSI will be seen. But otherwise, spouting a hugely impressive set of stats, it is no surprise that Zeus may be a threat towards many other top laners at MSI. Next, we get the jungler out of T1, Oner, who, similar to Zeus, has been with T1 in the Academy since 2020 and has jumped back and forth between being the substitute and in the main roster across that time. He currently has been in the main roster since July of 2021 and has done incredibly well for himself in this season. Despite having one of the lower champion pools amongst all of the different junglers at MSI, he does, however, boast a very impressive win rate with the ones that he holds. Not just in terms of the number of games they play because it's similar to execute, but because he facilitates the rest of his team in fantastic ways. Noting first here that you see the CS differential at 15 minutes for those who don't play jungle a lot. That means that he's regularly between 1 and 2 camps ahead at any given point, while still having a 71 kill participation, the most amount of first bloods on T1, and upkeeping that XP and gold difference at the same time. It is very rare to see junglers who not only gank aggressively and enable the team, as well as keeping up in the gold and their farming faster than their opponent. Oner makes a priority to not just enable his team and his laners, but to make sure that he is always a step ahead so that he can never be outdone by his opposing jungler. This is primarily part of the huge secret of the ability that T1 holds at keeping up this early game pressure. Should be a wonderful sight to see Oner absolutely wreck house in the jungle. Next, we have, without any introduction, is the legend himself, Faker. And no introductions needed, having been with this organization since Seasons 3 debut, February 2013. He's made a name of himself with 3 titles, one of only 2 players to ever have 3 World Championship titles individually. And for some people, you may look at the stats and wonder, well, this doesn't tend to match with the rest of T1. Why is the XP differential and CS differential so low at the 15-minute mark compared to the rest of the team? Good to note, T1 tends to play towards the bot side and towards heralds, in which case Faker, on his part, will find any opportunity to create space, picks, engage opportunities, and this is reflected in the types of champions that he's been given. You'll notice many of them are meant to zone out, find picks, create engages, and facilitate the rest of the team. Not often are we finding specifically high damage or high engage possibilities. This, however, lands him in a bit of a pickle on regularly finding himself killed off before the rest of his team can engage. Rare, but does still happen. And because he's still Faker, his name carries weight, and with it the Faker effect of seeing the rest of his team, or the rest of the opponent's team, regularly congregate to shut him down. But he's not the star of the show in this team. He is the enabler, the engager, and the zone creator for what is a magnificent and fantastic sight to see during team fights, as anytime there's a moment where you think the enemy team will come back, Faker will just find a way to get an engage. And speaking of which, bottom lane is the way we play through. Well, let's introduce, for those who may be familiar or not familiar, we have Gumayusi from the bottom lane. For those who don't know, Gumayusi has been with the organization for some time, since December of 2018, going back and forth between substitute position and the main roster, oftentimes flipping between Teddy and himself. Well, Teddy, having moved on from the roster, has now had Gumayusi at full force since July of 2021, and he's made a huge name for himself, boasting incredible stats again from the laning phase, oftentimes being the biggest reason as to why there is such a huge early lead during the laning phase. But again, he is the lane that they go towards to make sure that it is enabled to win, to siege, to push forward on everything. You'll look at this particular champion roster that he's played and notice that it is fairly sparse compared to many other marksmen who are going into the tournament. But given the fact that most marksmen are playing Jinx and Aphelios on a frequent basis, you'll notice that a specialty of T1 is using the Caitlyn to create spaces, and for those who didn't notice earlier in, it is a frequent ban against them. It is quite a sight to see. And overall, 70% of all games, Caitlyn is banned against Gumayusi. And for good reasons. The 6 games let through, 100% win rate with a 6 KDA. For those looking at the Zeri down below, 2 games with 22 KDA is not a great statistical standpoint. So we'll just move on from there. From it, Gumayusi is very good at making sure that he's playing within his space and assuring that he can still move on to be able to contest neutrals, specifically heralds, barons, as well as making sure to push in any particular structures when needed. Hence the emphasis on zoning specific champions as well as siege champions. Gumayusi on board should be a very tricky challenge for many of the other teams to try to get a hold of and pin down, as he is a very slippery player. Lastly, up into the support role, we meet Keria. Having been with T1 since 2020, previously in DRX, Keria has been a staple of T1's aggression, consistently finding different picks over here. The most amount amongst T1, having 16 champions played across the entirety of spring, holding no troubles in finding ways to create engages and space for Gumayusi in pretty interesting ways. His kill participation is incredibly high, showing that he is dedicated to roaming and making sure to always be first to the play to set up neutral objectives, boasting an incredible vision score of 2.64 per minute, which, for those who have been keeping track so far, with game times so low for T1, specifically the average game time being only 33 minutes, you would see an average of about like 70 vision score per minute. Under 33 minutes is huge. What does this translate to? Lots of vision cleared and lots of vision placed. Vision control is the cornerstone of how T1 is able to end games so quickly, so early in. Very hard for them to even approach their opponents to approach anything if they can't see what's going on, and they cannot approach teamfights in any safe manner. This, however, does sometimes give T1 a little bit of overconfidence and can land them into some trouble. Otherwise, Keria is your person to create catches, picks, and for zoning things out when needed. He is a solid, flexible player that always adds a little bit of a twist and spin, and is always hard to ban out any kinds of sieging compositions or 1-3-1 compositions out of T1 when he has such a set of picks to play from. So what does this mean for T1? I would say pretty simple. They are by far the favorites to win the whole thing. There is not a doubt in my mind. The first team to qualify is likely to be the first place team across the whole tournament, and it is a contest to see who will come in second place. Very few teams can I see that in the early game would have the ability to consistently punish T1's early aggression and sometimes overzealous nature to really push the envelope and limit test in areas they have no business limit testing in. That said, it should be a grand time to watch T1 be back in full form now that they boast a record almost virtually unbeatable for the future to come in their own region, and likely a path ahead to get an even better record and get their 4th title at Worlds and another title at MSI. For all of you watching, leave your thoughts down below. Over the next couple of days, I'll be releasing a bunch of these videos to introduce the different teams, including the next one, who are the second qualifiers, Istanbul Wildcats. And with that, I'll see you then. Bye.